Flying at twice the speed of sound, the pilot of a prototype F-22 fighter jet guides his aircraft through a test run. Equipped with stealth technology to avoid detection by enemy radar, the plane is truly state-of-the-art. Armed with weapons that a century ago could only have been imagined. At that time, just the thought of shooting a gun from an airplane seemed not only impossible, but absurd. Legendary fighter pilot Chuck Yeager has witnessed the incredible evolution of aircraft weaponry.
If we're going to talk about aerial gunnery, I suppose we should go back to the beginning during World War I, when scouts or reconnaissance airplanes would pass each other in the air, they would wave. Finally, some idiot pulled out a pistol and shot at the other guy and ruined a perfectly good thing. And from there, it got worse.
When pistol-packing pilots first came up with the idea of firing at the enemy from the air, aviation was still in its infancy. The U.S. Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, houses some of the first planes flown by the American military. Purchased by the U.S. Army Signal Corps in 1909, the prototype Wright military flyer cost $30,000. It was designated Signal Corps Airplane Number 1. Number 2 would be assigned to the Curtiss Model D type pusher. Only capable of flying at speeds less than 45 miles per hour for a duration under 2 hours. These early planes were designed for training and reconnaissance. But when pilots realized they could take a gun up in the air and fire at an unsuspecting target, the age of aircraft weaponry had begun. However, hitting a moving target from a moving plane with a single-shot weapon proved to be nearly impossible. It would take an adaptation of the recently developed machine gun before air-based weapons could be considered worthwhile.
This is an example of a World War I Lewis aircraft machine gun. It was originally designed by an American, Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Lewis, as a ground weapon, but was adapted very early on as an aircraft machine gun.
The .30 caliber Lewis machine gun was first tested from the air by Captain James Chandler in a Curtiss pusher.
They took this thing up, they spread a sheet on the ground, a large sheet of white cloth, and they flew this thing up, and Chandler fired the machine gun because, of course, he was in front and the pilot was behind him. He fired the machine gun over the front of the airplane, and I think they got, out of a 43-round drum, they got about 14 shots on the sheet. And everybody said, "Brilliant!"
The design of the Lewis was well suited to the needs of World War I gunners. As they flew behind the pilot position, airmen could move the weapon with ease. The Lewis's 97-round drum magazine meant there were no ammo belts to get in the way. Other nations copied the basic Lewis design for their fighters. And when Italian engineer Gianni Caproni developed a 3-engine bomber, he installed 2 Ravelli 6.5mm machine guns in the nose. As World War I progressed, race was on to design the most efficient warplanes and the guns to go with them. Pusher designs gave way to front-mounted propellers, and fixed-mount weapons eliminated the need for a gunner. Now, the pilot could both fly and man the gun himself. The obvious choice for placement of a machine gun was on the upper wing of biplanes, eliminating the chance of bullets hitting the propeller. This configuration, however, had certain logistical limitations.
There's a story told of an English pilot who was changing the magazine on a Lewis gun, which was on his top wing, and the Lewis gun magazine had a handle. And as he put it on, he lost control of the aircraft and it turned upside down. and he was hanging by the handle on the Lewis gun magazine, praying that it was going to hold. And the machine did a complete roll, and he fell back into the cockpit.
There was no doubt among World War I fighter pilots that the right place for a machine gun was directly in front of them. There, they could aim, reload, and clear stoppages in the gun while flying. For both airplane and gun designers, this brought about the next great challenge: how to fire the machine gun straight ahead without destroying the propeller.
Roland Garros, French pilot, he had the idea of fitting steel plates to the propeller in line with the machine gun, so that when he opened fire with a machine gun, if a bullet struck the prop, it just hit this steel plate and bounced off. And he was able to sneak up and shoot several Germans down, much to their astonishment.
Not to be outdone, the Germans developed a far more advanced method of firing through a rotating propeller.
It was the interrupter mechanism that would allow the machine gun to fire normally until a propeller blade came up into the line of fire, and then a mechanical interrupter cam would actuate, stop the machine gun from firing until the blade had passed safely out of the line of fire, hence allowing the machine gun to continue.
The Germans did not hold their design advantage for long. Within months, French, British, and American gun makers came up with their own methods of propeller synchronization. The skies over Europe soon became their own battlefield, with the famous dogfights of the First World War. To place his name in the history books as a fighter ace, a pilot had to shoot down 5 enemy planes. German ace Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, shot down 80 with the Maxim machine guns of his Albatross and Fokker plane. Eddie Rickenbacker became America's leading ace with 26 kills made from his French-built Spad.
They were very competitive, and they sought to be perfectionists they were doing. And these people now, in harmony with their aircraft, in harmony with their armament, are defining something really new in warfare in a very old-fashioned sort of way. Instead of knights, we have aces.
Between 1910 and 1918, aircraft weaponry changed literally every month.
It is truly in this period of World War I where one starts with pistols and a bolt-action rifle. As the war ends, in a very short period of time, aircraft weaponry has now gone to machine guns capable of 1,800 rounds a minute. It'll never be the same again. And modern aerial warfare had become defined.
America and her allies would have 20 years to develop fighter weaponry before the start of World War II. Then, another rapid burst of design advances would result in the awesome firepower of combat aircraft. The P-51 Mustang, P-17 Flying Fortress. When World War II began, American aircraft manufacturers were ready with faster planes and more powerful weaponry. One of the first planes to see action was the Bell P-39 Airacobra. Armed to the teeth, P-39 was equipped with 2 50 caliber machine guns in the nose and 2 more in the wings. But these weapons were no longer the Lewis's or the Vickers. were created by legendary American gunmaker John Browning. The P-39 was also armed with one of the first large-caliber weapons to be designated a cannon, firing straight through the hub of the propeller.
I flew the early models of the P-39s with the 20mm cannon firing through the prop hub and the 37mm. And we used to laugh when we were in training up in Nevada back in '43. When you fired that old 37mm cannon, it's like throwing a grapefruit. You just thing had a tracer in it, and it didn't have very good velocity, so it had a pretty sorry trajectory. But it was a big shell, and the Russians used it very effectively as a tank buster airplane.
Early World War II fighter pilots also relied heavily on the Curtiss P-40E. Nicknamed the Warhawk, the plane bristled with 6 .50 caliber machine guns and was capable of carrying 700 pounds of bombs. It was one of the planes that engaged Japanese Zeros and dive bombers during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Zeros, armed with 2 20mm cannons and 2 7.7mm machine guns, flying at speeds of 300 miles per hour, were superior aircraft. Even though outclassed, the P-39s and 40s held their own, thanks to the skills of American pilots. For fighter pilots, flying faster brought a new challenge: learning how far to flex or lead an enemy aircraft with machine gun fire.
Take all the fighter pilots involved in combat. 11% of all those fighter pilots shot down 90% of the airplanes that were destroyed. It's a big discrepancy. You wonder, what do the other 89% are doing? Well, in researching the background of these 11% that were so successful, almost without exception, the background of these pilots were they were raised as rural kids with a gun in their hand. They shot quail, running rabbits, squirrels, things like that. So they understood deflection shooting. And in addition to being, very good shots and understanding lead, they were also very aggressive and self-sufficient.
As World War II progressed, innovations came fast and furious. P-47 Thunderbolt proved to be a powerful fighter, carrying 6 or 8 .50 caliber machine guns and 2,500 pounds of bombs. But for most American pilots, technology peaked with the production of the P-51 Mustang. Mustangs were fast, capable of speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour, and could fly nearly 8 hours without refueling. Most significantly, the planes were equipped with 4 and later 6 .50 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings, with over 2,000 rounds of ammunition.
Each gun fired 850 rounds a minute. So, as you can see, you have almost 30 seconds of firepower. But obviously, you don't hold a trigger down for 30 seconds because you burn your barrels out after about 3 seconds, so you use short bursts.
The fact that the P-51's machine guns were mounted on the wings rather than the fuselage was just as important as the weapon's firepower.
Those guns were not shooting straight ahead. They were in fact slightly angled inward, so that from their separate distance of, say, 30-35 feet, at some point they would cross over and come together. It's just like pellets. The 12 gauge is going out there and getting your target. With that form of gunnery, you did not have to be the perfect aerial shot. With a shotgun, close works.
For the U.S. Navy, the equivalent of the popular P-51 Mustang were the Corsairs and Hellcats. Like their Army counterparts, both planes were equipped with .50 caliber Browning machine guns. Corsairs and Hellcats were powerful airplanes launched from aircraft carriers. But the biggest challenge for naval pilots, no matter what plane they flew, was landing on the relatively small landing strips floating in the middle of the sea. Ultimately, American pilots shot down thousands of enemy aircraft. By the end of World War II, 15 American aces could boast of more than 20 kills each.
The guy with the most experience is the best. It's that simple. You look at an airplane, you either shoot him down or he's going to shoot you down. You don't think about the outcome. You become mentally disciplined to forget about the outcome, because if you're involved in a war, you know it's an acceptable fact that somebody's going to get killed. And you just hope it's not you. Hell, if you get killed, hell, you don't know anything about it anyway.
While the finest fighter pilots of World War II chalked up kill after kill, more and more attention was being paid to the importance of placing machine guns on bombers. Not for attack, but self-defense. When the first Boeing B-17 rolled off the assembly line, it quickly lived up to its nickname, the Flying Fortress. Armed with up to 16 50 caliber machine guns to protect its crew and its 6,000-pound bomb load, the B-17G utilized one of the first powered machine gun turrets. Turrets would be improved on subsequent bomber B-24, B-25, and B-29. But with every innovation came new dilemmas. For turret gunners, the issue was safety.
In some aircraft, you couldn't get into a turret if you were wearing a parachute. And you couldn't get out of it if you were wearing a parachute. And you couldn't get out of it if it happened to be turned to a certain angle and the power failed. And I do believe a lot of air gunners got killed simply because they couldn't get out of their turrets when the plane was hit.
By the end of World War II, Browning 50 caliber machine gun had proven to be the best aerial armament in history. But the technology of aircraft weaponry had reached another major crossroad. In the mid-1940s, when the latest P-51D Mustangs rolled off the assembly line, they carried something new under their wings: 5-inch rockets. While pilots continued to rely on their trusted Brownings for the remainder of the war, it would be rockets and missiles that launched aircraft weaponry into the second half of the 20th century. Less than 5 years passed between the end of World War II and the start of the Korean War. But those 5 years saw a quantum leap in the development of military aircraft and weapons. Soviet Union's prime fighter was now the jet-powered MiG-15, carrying two 23mm cannons, one 37mm cannon, plus 2,000 pounds of rockets or bombs. MiG-15 was capable of flying 670 miles per hour. At the start of the Korean conflict, the primary U.S. air defense planes were the F-82 Twin Mustangs. They flew nearly 2,000 sorties over Korea, but recorded only 3 aerial kills. Twin Mustangs had been supplanted by America's first mass-produced jet fighter, the Lockheed F-80 Shooting Star. Armed with 6 50 caliber machine guns, Shooting Star combined massive firepower with air speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. On November 9, 1950, the world's first all-jet dogfight took place. Armed with 6 Browning 50 caliber machine guns and 16 5-inch rockets, F-80 piloted by Air Force First Lieutenant Russell J. Brown shot down a MiG-15. Air-to-air combat would never be the same. The jet age had arrived. For American fighter pilots in Korea, successor to the F-80 was one of the most popular planes ever built, the F-86 Sabre. Originally armed with 6 50 caliber Browning machine guns and 8 5-inch rockets. The design of the Sabre evolved from discoveries that were made in the late 1940s, when Chuck Yeager became the first pilot to fly faster than the speed of sound in a Bell X-1 experimental jet.
What we found out was that if you want to fly in the region of the speed of sound, you have to have a flying tail on your airplane. Get away from the horizontal stabilizer and the elevator, because you lose your elevator effectiveness at about 0.94 Mach number. We found that out, so we put a flying tail on the F-86 and all of the airplanes that were produced after that.
In addition to its extraordinary maneuverability, the F-86 Sabre benefited from a major advance in its sighting mechanism. General Frederick Boots Blessé, author of the Jet Fighter Tactical Manual, Guts, No Glory, shot down 10 MiGs during the Korean War.
In the F-86, we had a site, it was called the K-14 site, and that was a radar. It gave you ranges by radar. It went out, and the minute you locked on a target, if you were in a slight turn and had the pipper on the guy, and suddenly the radar locked on him, the pipper would begin drifting back like this. It's telling you right away that if you want to hit that guy, you're going to have to pull way around here and get enough lead to where your bullets will come way out in front of him, and then he'll fly into him. But that radar sight was marvelous.
To combat the longer range weaponry of the MiGs, American gun designers concluded they needed heavier weapons than their 50 caliber Brownings. But they needed the weapons to be able to fire at a faster rate than earlier grapefruit cannon launchers. The answer came in the form of 20mm guns, whose feed mechanisms were powered electrically.
Instead of a single chamber and a single barrel, we now have a rotary chamber. This is not unlike a big revolver. We have revolving cylinders present in this gun. The M39 was a very successful, very reliable gun design and significantly increased the rates of fire possible in aerial combat.
Taking the design of the electrically powered 20mm one step further, designers soon changed its configuration to a multiple barrel weapon.
America goes back to its roots. It goes back to a concept almost as old as multi-fire weapons can be, and that's the Gatling gun. If you had a rotating chamber, why not rotating barrels? And that leads us logically into the M61 series of 20mm Vulcan guns. The Vulcan gun is not operated in the traditional manner. We're using an electric motor to drive this thing, which means as a machine, we can run this thing really fast. We can control its rates of fire. M61, the rotating gun system, becomes the perfect and almost perfect solution for the United States in the jet age.
For some veteran pilots, however, the design changes were irrelevant.
It didn't make any difference. You pull the triggers. It's a bullet that does the job. You pull the trigger, the bullet goes out there. If a bullet hits what you're shooting at, it does a pretty good job. If it doesn't, you're missing them.
As the Korean War came to a close, Browning 50 caliber machine gun that had been America's standard aircraft weapon since the start of World War II was becoming obsolete.
The Korean War was the swan song for the .50 caliber. After that, it's become at least a 20 millimeter game for America. The M61 gun system, which starts in the 50s, is still in use today.
Although some F-86 Sabres in Korea were also armed with rockets, the machine gun continued to be the only weapon for air-to-air combat. Many consider the role of rocketry to be extremely limited.
For instance, a lot of times we'd go out and we'd pick out a building, and the damn thing is 40 or 50 feet wide and maybe 100 feet long. And the rockets are wonderful for that. You can hit that thing with all 8 of the rockets, one at a time, and never miss that. But if you're trying to hit something that's the size of a starter shed on a golf course, not so good.
The debate over the effectiveness of guns versus rockets and missiles had begun. It would culminate in the Vietnam War, when the first F-4 Phantoms arrived overseas without any guns at all. In the 1960s, the first fighter planes sent to Vietnam were the Century Series fighter jets. First production airplanes capable of flying faster than the speed of sound in level flight. The 100s came armed with a variety of rockets, missiles, and guns.
When we went into the Vietnam conflict, most of the airplanes like the F-104s or F-105s then were equipped with the T-61 Gatling gun, a 6-barrel gun that fired 6,000 rounds a minute. Here again, with such a high firing rate, that decreased your firing time way down. But there again, we had developed lead computing gun sights that were so good that basically if you put the pipper on the target, you hit it.
One of the true workhorses of the Vietnam War was the F-4 Phantom. When the first Phantoms arrived, Boots Blessé was an operations director. He immediately noticed something unusual. Phantom had no guns. The Sidewinder missiles designed for the plane were much more sophisticated than earlier rocketry. They were smart weapons, capable of following a moving target by radar or heat-seeking capabilities. But Blessé became concerned following the Phantom's first encounters with Soviet-built MiG-19s and 21.
Drop from altitude down close to the deck, ground clutter and everything else that the missile picks up takes away its effectiveness. So if you don't have a gun, you might as well just let the guy go. As soon as he goes down there, you can't really do anything with him. So if you got down there and slowed down, he'd probably shoot you down.
Blessé was convinced that the F-4 needed a traditional gun. And if the manufacturer wouldn't provide one as standard equipment, he'd install it himself as an option.
So we decided that we ought to try to put a gun on the F-4. And we had a Su-16 pod that had a 20 millimeter Gatling gun in it. And I said, I'm not telling you that this is a good idea. I'm telling you is we want to go over this thing and massage it, put it on the airplane, fly it, find out how much extra fuel it takes, find out whether you think we can hit anything with it. And when we get through with this in about 2 or 3 weeks, then I want you to tell me it's a dumb idea. And if it is a dumb idea, don't tell me that it isn't, because I want to know it's dumb if it is.
It was definitely not a dumb idea. Blessé's report back to headquarters that day read as follows. We engaged enemy aircraft in the Hanoi area, shooting down 3 without the loss of any F-4s. 1 was destroyed with missiles. That cost the U.S. government $46,000. The other 2 aircraft were destroyed using the 20 millimeter cannon. Those 2 kills cost the government $1,130 and $550 respectively. Soon, more Phantoms began arriving in Vietnam with 20 millimeter guns as standard equipment. Throughout the war, air weapons technology continued to improve. Nowhere was firepower more overwhelming than with the conversion of a C-130 cargo plane into a mammoth gunship, the Spectre.
Spectre is an absolutely awesome gunfighter. This is where we have multiple miniguns. We have 40 millimeter Bofors, and we have 105 millimeter cannons firing out the side of an aircraft on ground targets. And it's putting tens of thousands of rounds into a very small target area.
Ironically, the heaviest fighting that occurred in the skies above Vietnam took place in aircraft that had never before required weaponry. Helicopters called Huey.
Helicopters entered into Vietnam, for the most part unarmed, and became vulnerable to ground fires. There are tactical applications. Some defensive firepowers had to be given to them. Hence we get door gunner. It's very ad hoc at first. It's Rube Goldberg, lashed together, welded together, make it work, put a Browning 30 caliber, whatever you can get, hang it on the door and hope for the best. This becomes quickly more sophisticated. So we have the M60 being adapted as a door gun. Even some miniguns being adapted to helicopters for suppression.
The more advanced Hueys, particularly the UH-1A and B, featured machine guns mounted externally. Weapons were belt-fed from ammo boxes in the helicopter cabin. They were aimed by co-pilots using reflector-type gun sights. Other versions of the UH-1 series were modified to carry rocket pods, grenade launchers, and mortars.
Those guys were at tremendous risk all the time. I mean, we used to go to Hanoi and we'd come down the chute at 500 knots, and more often than not, we come back with holes in the airplane at 500 knots. These guys are cruising across the treetops at 120 knots. Boy, I tell you, that's a gutsy business, and they lost an awful lot of them, and they were constantly going into hot spots where some of our troops were trapped by the enemy, and they'd go in there and try to get them aboard and get them out of there, you know, and those guys were fantastic and at risk all the time.
Fall of 1965 saw a turning point in the development of helicopter technology. With the introduction of the Huey Cobra, helicopters became offensive gunships as well as troop transports. Cobras flew at a top speed of 219 miles per hour, nearly double that of troop carriers. They were armed with rapid-firing machine guns, cannons or grenade launchers, all mounted in remote-controlled turrets under the nose. As the world now knows, Vietnam was a war that technological superiority could not win. Advanced developments in weaponry had little effect against an enemy that was often literally unseen. While Americans protested the war back home, veteran pilots worked hard to ignore the politics, continued doing their jobs.
There's an old phrase that I think most military guys, yours is not to question why, yours is to do or die. It was no different from World War II or Korea. As far as we were concerned, you were duty oriented. You had a mission to fly, you flew it. The political influences on the war, obviously the rules of engagement put you at a disadvantage, but that's not for you to question why.
After Vietnam, greater attention was paid to the possibility that future wars might be fought not on land, but from the air alone. Newer, more sophisticated weaponry would make that a reality in the Gulf War and Kosovo. November 2nd, 1999 brought a dramatic first to military aircraft history. 6 Soviet-made MiG-29 aircraft prepared to take off, not from Russian tarmac, but from Nellis Air Force Base, just outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. For the first time ever, MiGs flown by German pilots played the role of enemy aggressors in Nellis's Red Flag training exercises.
For most of our aviators out there that have not had an opportunity to fly against the MiG-29, this is an incredible opportunity for them to actually do that in a training environment. Obviously, the MiG-29, one of the most widely exported fighters in the world, and a very capable threat. It's just a great opportunity for us to be able to train against it in this type of scenario.
The American pilots training at Nellis flew F-15s and 16s, fighter jets that represent the evolution of American aircraft and weaponry since the early 1970s. In 1990, F-15s and 16s were the workhorses of Operation Desert Storm. Fighting Iraqi MiG-23s and 25, the American jets were armed with a variety of missiles and a single gun, a 20mm M61 Gatling gun. The M61 has been state-of-the-art for 30 years.
The M61A1 that's in the F-15E, as well as most of the other frontline American fighters, to include the F-14, the F-18, and the F-16, is a very, very reliable system.
Does a high rate of fire, more than double that what we find on most foreign countries' guns. And we carry a large amount of ammunition, both in the F-16 and F-15.
While F-15s and 16s handled air-to-air combat during Desert Storm, the A-10 Warthog specialized in ground targets. 2 was equipped with a variety of missiles, but the Warthog's most effective weapon was placed menacingly in the plane's nose, a GAU-8 30mm Gatling gun.
Guns are the soul of a fighter plane, and no situation is more evident than this. We got a gun that sits about 20 feet long, carries 1,150 rounds of 30mm ammunition, a mix of armor-piercing incendiary and high-explosive incendiary bullets in a 5-to-1 ratio that wreaks havoc across the battlefield for any tanks that happen to be in the way.
In most modern fighter planes, gun placement was determined only after aerodynamic design was complete. But the A-10 was designed around its gun.
It's the GAU-8 gun, capable of firing 3,900 rounds per minute. That's roughly 65 rounds per second.
In this hangar at Nellis, the entire workings of the Warthog's gun mechanism are laid out so pilots in training can fully understand the incredible firepower at their disposal. In Desert Storm alone, pilots flying the A-10 knocked out over 900 enemy tanks using the armor-piercing shells of the 30mm Gatling gun.
In Desert Storm, it got the nickname the silent gun. Because the bullets are going supersonic out of the barrel, you actually see the bullet's impact before you hear the sound.
Another tank killer played an important role in the Gulf War from a much lower altitude. The AH-64 Apache helicopter used a 30mm machine gun mounted in a turret under its cockpit. 16 laser-guided anti-tank missiles were carried under its stub wings. Infrared sighting made the Apache a major threat, day or night. After Desert Storm, new developments in F-15, 16, and 18 fighter jets concentrated on missile technology. Captain Michael Schauer used that technology in the Kosovo conflict in 1999. He was flying his first combat mission in an F-15 when he saw an enemy MiG-29 heading his way.
I almost got physically sick for about almost 2 minutes, where my stomach was tightening up, and butterflies would not be an adequate description of what I felt. And at 14 miles, I take the first shot. The missile's now tracking the target itself, and I can leave that missile if I wanted to, but I immediately select and shoot an AIM-7 at him as well to up what we call the PK, the probability of a kill. MiG turns away from me, trying to put himself what we call the beam. It's hard for the radar to track him in the beam, so he's showing me an aspect that would be like this. So instead of pointing at me, he's on what we call 90 degrees off, perpendicular. He does that for a few seconds. I look outside when the missiles time out. I do not see a fireball, and I'm now about 5 miles away from him. I go, this is not good, because he's within range where he can shoot back at me now if he sees me or gets a lock. And at 5 miles, I go ahead, I've still got a lock, and I take a third shot, another AMRAAM. I roll the airplane up and start watching the missile as it trails down. And I watch the missile, I see a big explosion. MiG-29 folds in half. It's about a 150-foot flame trailing the aircraft, and I just see the two pieces kind of spiral down into the ground.
Captain Schauer got his first kill using a missile. But he and his fellow pilots agreed that every fighter plane still needs a more traditional weapon.
I'd say right now that all missiles are defeatable because they rely on many things. The only thing we have on our airplanes that is not defeatable, unless it's a by pilot error, is the gun.
What do you have left to shoot if he's defeated everything else? Well, if you show up at that merge without a gun, you're in big trouble because he's going to shoot you and you can't shoot him.
When you're up in close, it's kind of like being in a telephone booth. The only weapon that you have there is that gun.
Today, the future of aircraft weaponry can be found in the first prototypes of the F-22. Stealth technology enables pilots to strike without being detected by radar. Missiles are capable of being fired in any direction, and a helmet-mounted sighting system allows a pilot to aim those missiles simply by looking at a target. The Soviet-made MiG-29 already has a version of this technology.
Instead of having to lock somebody with the radar and only being able to shoot the guys that are right out in front of him, he can, as an example, take his head and turn to the right and look up or look down or wherever he wants to look, and the missile follows him. So he can, as an example, see somebody up there and he can go, Fox, and he can take a shot and the missile will come off and track him up there, and then he can look over here and go shoot somebody over here off to the side. So he's incredibly lethal inside that within visual range environment. And since we don't have that, we're at a fairly significant disadvantage inside within visual range until we get that equipment.
For military aviation, 20th century will be remembered as a time of nearly inconceivable progress. From the first crudely mounted machine gun to missiles that aim with the turn of a pilot's head. It is difficult to imagine what the 21st century might bring. But if the men and women who fly the planes continue to have input, one design configuration will never change. The planes will always have a gun.